there is something about that imagination which was inactive before, where I was complacent to my circumstances. I really could not see whether my reality could be any different. I really just submitted to whatever was told to me, that this is going to be your life. And so for me, my rebellion, even though I rebelled in other ways in general, was in my imagination first and other things later. And I think a lot of people, because they don't even imagine it, they don't even do small steps like talking to their parents. And those things that probably led me in the long run towards accomplishing this would not have happened if I opened my mind in itself. And so, because so many people, they're limited by their circumstances without really recognizing that their imagination has so much power to take them beyond it. Like, even if they're not really going to become a millionaire tomorrow, just not thinking that I'm going to be poor forever, just basic, like that action of going beyond your reality and believing in it, because faith is really important here as well. Because if you don't have faith in your imagination and you don't see it integrating into your reality, you won't really do actions that will follow up. And so for me, there was this element of imagining, but also having so much confidence that maybe somewhere this was possible. And that was sort of like religious faith. Just I put it in my imagination and I was like, let me go forward with this. Hello.
Hello. Welcome, everyone. This is the Embodied Dialogue podcast. I'm Seth Dellinger, and here with me today is Rayan Magon. Welcome, Rayan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's really nice to be here.
Yeah, wonderful. We've talked a couple times. I'm just going to give a brief introduction of you, and if you'd like to add on to that, please feel free. But you're originally from India, and you are now studying psychology and philosophy as a Pearson scholar at the University of Toronto. And the conversations we've had so far have been largely about an idea of yours, something you call mindful imagination. You have a TED Talk on that. We could put a link for viewers if they want to listen to your TED Talk. I understand that you have another TED Talk that's coming out soon on the question of identity. So that's also a little preview of what we might talk about now. And just anything else you want to add, just for people to get a sense of you here at the beginning of our conversation?
That seemed like a really good introduction. Thank you for doing that. I'm just really happy to be chatting with you. I just want to just share my ideas on the two topics that we discussed, and also why I'm interested in your podcast in particular, the work with motion and movement, and also the idea of embodiment that I'm generally very interested in. So I think we'd have a really fun discussion.
Yeah, me too. It's been fun so far on the previous occasions.
For introducing.
Yeah. Well, so mindful imagination, the first way I was able to understand it was just through your story. And as I've told you, something that really impacted me was something you said about growing up in India, and in your family, there were certain expectations. Like one of the things that just really was front and center was, because you're a woman, there was certain expectations. And I remember you said something about the idea of like, well, your father's your caretaker, and then, there's an arranged marriage, and then your husband becomes your caretaker. And you at a young age kind of figured out, I don't think that's how I want to live my life. But what you explained was like, your parents, they cared for you, and like, I didn't cure like any animosity, but it was a sense of, because of the traditions and the culture, their imagination of what your life could be had a certain limit. And then you needed to actually train yourself to imagine something that your own parents weren't capable of imagining.
Exactly.
And this is actually kind of like how it is that you managed to get to this point where you're in Toronto, Canada. So, but I know there's a lot more to fill in. So
yes,
tell us more.
That was really good as a brief introduction. I think that is sort of where I am at. Like, the reason I developed this concept or coined this term was essentially because for me, transcending my circumstances involved a lot of my imagination. And I've always been an imaginative kid growing up. The only thing is I didn't think it was useful for a long time, or other people didn't think it was useful because it felt like a useless activity, just being lost in my own head all the time, not focusing on what is in front of me. But then I recognized that maybe there is something to it, but maybe I have to also listen to other people in the meanwhile, because I completely rejected the notion of mindfulness, of focusing on what is in front of me, because just daydreaming about whatever does not necessarily help in the process of creation. It doesn't help you actually to get to action and to make something happen, right? And
Yeah.
so the reason I coined this term was a little bit like to like counter my own tendencies towards imagination, but also to integrate it in a way that it works well together.
Hmm.
And also because I have some ADHD tendencies, everybody's always told me to sit still, be mindful, and it never
Yeah.
like went in my head, what the hell does this mean?
Right.
So like I
Well,
made
so
a
what's really
decision.
interesting is, if I heard you right, um, well, you're doing something that I think is really important. You're clarifying our terms, right? And there's a lot of words in the world today that are just thrown around, and we get in these arguments, and then we find out later half the argument is because the definition of the word is different. But yeah, a lot of, and I've run into this in my life, imagination, or like a word that's often associated creativity, from certain points of view, like if you're daydreaming, if you're unfocused. And I mean, I can understand, like, if I'm just daydreaming when I'm supposed to be doing a task, that is, but that is, let's say, dysfunctional in some way. But I think I heard you say also that mindfulness, at least in your experience, was kind of associated with this thing of like sit still, and like this kind of almost restrictive external,
Force.
yeah, just people telling me what to do, telling me, and then you've brought these two words together. It seems like you're kind of trying to make each one make peace with the other, or something like that.
Exactly, because I don't think they're actually in conflict. It's just
Yeah.
that like a lot of the time it seems that mindfulness really focuses on what is in front of you. It does not necessarily take into account the subjective. It's like almost like focusing on what's in front of you does not mean that you can't focus on what's in your head. So that constant integration is necessary. So that's why I had this balloon metaphor, where it's like you're seeing what is in front of you, which is this balloon, but creativity is going beyond and seeing what you can do with it, which is blowing within it.
Mm-hmm.
But the sense of being mindful is that you have to be aware that you're still blowing in a balloon. There are limits, and so you don't want to accidentally burst or go beyond that barrier, and you want to stay within the limits. And so I always feel like when I'm even in class, I'm watching a lecture or something like that, I do have a tendency to go off on tangents. But how far do I let my imagination flow is where mindfulness comes in. Is that I'm not completely limiting myself from going off and thinking other things, but they have to still be related to the main center point. So, but the thing is, like, if I go too far off, I can easily lose that grip, and like I'll go too in my head.
Right.
So mindful
And on the other
imagination
hand, in
is
India,
balance.
the you felt confined by
Yeah.
not being able essentially to dream enough.
Exactly. Like specifically for my life, it felt like all my dreams were already written for me. So
Right.
just having the freedom and the liberty to be in my own head and imagine whatever I wanted, because I knew that I couldn't do whatever I wanted, but at least in here I was free. And so that was my first steps towards like achieving whatever freedom I got in insofar as doing what I really did. And that involved some convincing to my parents and also expanding their imagination because they couldn't see what I saw.
Right.
But personally, I think it was very necessary, because if I did not see that vision as clearly, I would not feel confident in it to make it actually happen. And that's why dreaming within reality is very important, because so many people have dreams that really don't match their circumstances. They're really far off. So if your vision doesn't align and you don't see a clear path towards it, which is why the notion of carving a path, you'll really like be in this tug of war between this is your reality and this is your imagination. You can't.
Right. There's like a tension between what
Exactly.
I dream of, which, I mean, when I think of the word dream, also, like, I go to sleep at night and I dream. It's not like I plan my dreams,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
like a dream comes to me and it fills me up, and it maybe makes me see this potential possibility in my life. And then yet if I wake up in the morning and I look around and it's nothing like the dream, yeah, there could be a real pain and tension there. So I'm curious, like, just to fill us in a little more. So like, what was your experience I don't know, just as a child in school? And
That's a very good question.
yeah.
There's a lot we can discuss there. I think personally, I like the school was mostly the major part of my struggle growing up, specifically though, even though society was pretty conservative, school is when it got even worse, like the problems with authority and everything else, because it
And
was
can
that
you give a
struggle.
little picture for someone who's not from India, just to sort of what is school like? And then, also, of course, what was your particular experience of it like?
So for one, they're really prissy. So like boys and girls, they have to sit separately. At least growing up, eventually it mingled in. So every single thing that they have, like it's just their values are so degraded that they can't deal with basic fundamental things that people do. So they have to suppress everything. And so I think I personally struggled a lot with basically just authority. Like even if I'm like looking into like the teacher's eyes wrong and I'm not like repenting or feeling guilty enough, they will think I'm behaving badly. And so for
Would
me,
a
like I
teacher
got,
say something based on how you're looking in their eyes? Would
yeah, and
they
like
would
my
talk to you?
parents would be called every few days. Like I
Uh,
had like I was the
uh-huh.
bad child quite seriously growing up, because like mostly one, because of ADHD I couldn't sit still. I would be very curious. So my tendency towards asking questions felt argumentative. So that was one of the concerns. But I think like Indian teachers, their egos are so fragile that like
Mm,
really my temperaments weren't well suited
mm.
with that authority dynamic, and it really just messed me up bad.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned also, just to make sure that people didn't miss it. You mentioned ADHD, and I know this is a big question in your life and something you've also talked to, or you've talked about quite a lot. I saw a video. Can't remember, but you were on a podcast that was all
We
about
were.
neurological diversity, I think is the phrase that would be used, but
Yes,
just people
yes.
with different neurological conditions. What's it like? And so, is this diagnosis something that was given to you?
So that was something that like anybody that sees me, the first thing they put is that label. I
Yeah,
don't personally agree with it, specifically because I think it's sort of like I see that as a part of my personality. I don't think it's a disorder per se. The same with like
right.
autistic tendencies. They were noticeable, but like for that I personally had to seek a diagnosis. But they did like make my life a little bit overwhelmingly difficult, specifically in India, because there's a lot of social norms that you have to follow. Like
Right.
here I feel like I'm liberated, but there was a lot
Yeah.
of structure that for my autistic temperaments were not like at all like
Right.
they
We've
didn't match up.
we've talked about John Vervaeke because he's professor of cognitive psychology and philosophy, and he's there at the University of Toronto. And I heard him talk about ADHD once recently, and he just sort of made the point like, well, you have to look at it in terms of culture. It's like, you know, the particular whatever traits that we give that label might be very, very functional in a different kind of a culture. But of course, we live in a
Exactly.
culture that's all about this, sit still, be quiet. There's a correct way to look at the teacher, all of these, and so in that setting, I mean, I am hearing that you kind of had the experience of, I'm a bit different than the other kids.
Exactly. But here
Okay.
I feel like just that I do belong. So I think
You're in
growing
the
up in
West,
India,
so to speak.
yeah, I didn't have the sense of home or belonging ever.
Uh,
So this like destruction of home that I felt like for me was the reason, half the reason that I wanted to leave was that I wanted to find a new home. But when I came here, it's like this is not it either. I felt even worse, like this complete destruction of my identity was actually coming here. But that was necessary for me to feel like I'm getting like
right.
something deeper coming out a little bit more authentically. Um, I was just trying to say that in general, like growing up in India, it was mostly the structure of the culture that was not like it was antithetical. Like every single thing was antithetical to my personality. So, like, even though maybe I can idealize India in terms of what it was like and I love my culture, I cannot be there. Like, if I lived there long term, I would genuinely feel suffocated. It's not meant
Mm-hmm.
for me.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk to me a little bit more about the question of gender? Because one of the things that you eventually did was create a board game to sort of promote a discussion about gender in India, which is quite a fascinating thing you did. And I'm sure people would love to hear about that as well.
Yes, certainly. So I think like for me it was that like the gender stereotypes there were extremely like put in different boxes, and I didn't feel like I had the liberty to just even be myself as an individual. It's like the gender came first, my identity came second. And so like all of the things that I had to do in life or who I had to become was just decided for me, and it felt really uncomfortable. So what I like for me, I thought that maybe like the way I changed like some people's minds just by opening their minds, like this is not what gender means. There's something more to this. Like I thought I could make a board game where people's like just general associations would switch up, and they would stop associating this traditional family life with women, just that it, or like humanities with women and not science and all of those basic things. And so what I did was like I created a game where we give start cards, where in the start cards there's a character which has either male, female, or like no gender, and they have a superpower and a side effect of the superpower. The superpower is often like counter stereotypical, like maybe a lady who's like very good at fighting or something like that, or like very authoritative or something like that, that isn't traditionally associated with women. But they also have a side effect that they're seen as bossy or something like that, which is more realistic. So I had those counter stereotypical like superpowers and side effects, and then there were like cards that like would have just words on it, but they had like things that might like sort of emerge a dialogue about a particular issue. And so there were just like implicit things that would make the storyline emerge in a certain way, that their biases will be reduced. And then there would be an end card which had like a moral quote or something like that, which had, you know, really strong affirmative things where like the most courageous people are people that can be vulnerable, for example, because men don't feel like they can be vulnerable. So just different things. And then everybody just went around and they said a story, and whoever could finish by ending on their card would win. And so it's just the storytelling game. But the thing is, in the process, when you go into your imagination, because this was also highly focused on just imagination, you end up like seeing things that you would not see in daily life, because specifically in India, the daily life is so very like restrictive that you would not really see those things represented, maybe through television, but otherwise there's no way. So
what did you hear about, because I know you got support to create this game and distribute it, I don't know how widely, but in any case, for those that experienced this game, like what was the impact? Did you get some feedback on how, you know, people's experience when they played this game?
Certainly. So like the intention was that not to tell them that this is supposed to reduce their bias, because then like they would be conscious of it, and because it's implicit biases, like the thing is that usually people get defensive when you tell them they're biased, right? So that's the thing that I wanted to avoid.
Right.
So without giving, like I did a debriefing thing afterwards, but initially there was a bit of deception involved. And so yeah, so like essentially they didn't know that what was happening to them.
Just a board game, just gonna play
exactly. And they took like a simple like implicit association test before and after, and also like a conscious test. But the thing is that like I didn't tell them that the two were related, that the test.
So this sounds like also like a research study.
Yeah, that I did that.
Okay.
That was a project I won like at the Intel International Science Fair. I was representing my country there, and I won like a few awards. I never ended up publishing it because the data is all like also just like too much going on with school, and I came to Canada and a lot happened in my life.
Right.
So, but I want to definitely make this board game accessible.
I mean, I guess so. You talked about giving people a sort of a quiz on implicit biases before and after. And I'm also just curious, like, if you heard any personal stories, like, wow, I played this game and I realized this, or I ended up having this conversation with my wife or my friends, or like, did you get any stories of like just people giving you that kind of direct feedback about what was the impact of that?
Yeah. So like after the IAT and everything was done, during the debriefing time, I'm like, did you guys figure this out? Like what I was trying to do, or was this still hidden? So when I asked them the question, like some people were stumped and some people like had some clue, given that they were associated together. And they did mention that this like really just expanded their thinking, that they would not really be thinking in these archetypes or thinking in these dimensions normally if those like things to prime it weren't there. Like they wouldn't really associate these things with women, for example, or with men. And that this felt very natural for them to think like this, that these things did not feel like it was antithetical to whatever the norms prescribed. They were quite normal, so to say. And so the fact that they could go into their imagination and experience it as closely as reality, and specifically because you're supposed to use pronouns for different like people. And so if you're playing a male character, you're a male character, and other people have to identify you as such. That made people like really like go into a place where their imagination was reality. They
So
could
people
not.
were doing a bit of role playing when they played the game as
Exactly.
well.
Yeah, it was
Got it.
storytelling and role playing involved as a game. And
Uh-huh.
so like you had to become your character to the extreme degree. So it was also you becoming a character,
Right.
you're also seeing other people play
So I'm
characters.
not just having a discussion about the role of men and women. I'm enacting a particular role, and then I'm going, oh, I didn't expect that that role would be associated with my gender or something like this. And I'm feeling things maybe I never felt before.
Exactly. So
And
that
I
you
heard
have
you
to
mention just now, again, the word imagination. So I'm kind of hearing that this maybe was one of your first projects really in mindful imagination,
exactly.
because people maybe really weren't capable of imagining some of the things that were actually embedded in the game. And then, whatever the result was, they were like, their imagination maybe
Went
just
beyond.
stretches further after doing something like this.
Exactly. And so for me, that was the intention. It was the fact that your mindful reality of being in India did not show you these things, did not show you how women can be a certain way or men can be a certain
Right.
way. And through this game, your like imagination was expanded.
Right.
And this was actually the inspiration, because that's what I did with my parents. I just started talking to them and showed them different like ways of being and how my life could be different. And I thought that maybe I can take all of the things that were successful with other people and put it in a game. And it did end up becoming successful. So I felt like quite good about that.
Well, and then the game itself gave you more prominence. You have an international scholarship. We mentioned that, and I mean that I imagine people said, "Wow, she created this game." That must have been part of the process that helped you be selected, right? And so, just to kind of review, like this idea of mindful imagination as part of your personal story, I imagine as a girl who was getting in trouble for looking at teachers the wrong way, and girls and boys are separate, like there must have been a point in time where before you'd really made some leaps where you must have felt like, I'm going to live a life that's going to be really miserable for me. Yeah. And then at a certain point, you're I don't know what, but you're beginning to imagine things and test things out, even though they might appear to be impossible. Let me just play with this. And you keep doing these kinds of things that eventually you're having conversations with your family that probably your classmates are not having. Exactly. Eventually you're creating this game that maybe, a few years before you never would have considered that you would do that. But then each one of these things, I imagine it actually moves the reality towards the larger scope that you've imagined. Like by the time you've created a game and you've won a science fair, I mean, now it's not so crazy to think, well, maybe I could move across the world to Canada. Exactly. So what about that? What about the University of Toronto? How's that been?
That's been great, but like let me just like mention a little bit about what you mentioned before, because
sure, yeah,
there is something about that imagination which was inactive before, where I was complacent to my circumstances. I really could not see whether my reality could be any different. I really just submitted to whatever was told to me, that this is going to be your life. And so for me, my rebellion, even though I rebelled in other ways in general, was in my imagination first and other things later. And I think a lot of people, because they don't even imagine it, they don't even do small steps like talking to their parents, and those things that probably led me in the long run towards accomplishing this would not have happened if I opened my mind in itself. And so, because so many people, they're limited by their circumstances without really recognizing that their imagination has so much power to take them beyond it. Like even if they're not really going to become a millionaire tomorrow, just not thinking that I'm going to be poor forever, just basic, like that action of going beyond your reality and believing in it, because faith is really important here as well. Because if you don't have faith in your imagination and you don't see it integrating into your reality, you won't really do actions that will follow up. And so for me, there was this element of imagining, but also having so much confidence that maybe somewhere this was possible. And that was sort of like religious faith. Just I put it in my imagination and I was like, let me go forward with this. And
well, it's interesting that you mentioned religious faith, because one of the other things I was thinking just now is like, I imagine for a lot of people, you said you had an internal rebellion in your imagination, right?
Mhm.
But I imagine a lot of people do have that, but they don't take the step of trying to realize it. And that internal rebellion could almost be agonizing, because I'm walking through the world and I'm just so present to this kind of other reality that I feel like I should be living in. And yet I don't see it reflected out there, and I don't know how to create it. So like my dreams can actually be a source of misery if I
Yeah,
don't, like, so
exactly.
was there, how do you feel like you maybe bridged that piece? Because I think that's where a lot of people get stuck.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do live in impossibility. Like I was like that. I really did not like see these steps that would carve a path. It was just like, yeah, like I'm going to be a superstar. Whatever in my brain, I can dream whatever I want. Nothing realistic. And so every single moment that I spent in my reality, it was a misery. It was like, I live in this head where I have these things, but they're not really here. And so the thing was that first I had to have that radical acceptance of what was in front of me. So there is this need for mindfulness. So if I'm not really present in what is there, and my reality is not, like actually true for my circumstances, and my imagination just does whatever, it really wouldn't allow me to create something like that. So for creativity, even in general, like there needs to be this like mindful imagination thing. I take a paintbrush, I take other things, and I have to know that these are the things that I have and this is what I can put out there. And so
Right.
if I don't have any paints and I don't have any of the tools, then thinking that I can make like a painting right now is sort of stupid. So just doing that thing where I knew what tools I had. Maybe for me, I was a little lucky where I really could bring that imagination into reality. And I know a lot of people are limited so severely that there isn't a lot of room to like, explore and dream that big. But there are simple things that you can do every single day, where which is where my thing started. Was it was talking to my parents, it was talking to
Right.
other people, building that up initially, and eventually my dream became bigger. So I didn't dream I'm going to go out of India all of a sudden. It was just basic things where I started seeing, but maybe my parents won't marry me off, maybe this won't happen. So small things I took off the like line, and eventually I found a bigger dream to follow.
And I
So
guess one of the things that shifted at a certain point is maybe a new quality of listening from your parents when you continued to be persistent,
exactly.
and they started to actually realize, oh, so I imagine their imaginations have shifted in a number of ways.
Certainly. Like I feel like if this all didn't happen, I wouldn't really like value their opinion as much. Like now I genuinely feel like they know what's best for me. But before I always felt like what do you know? Other people are telling you what you should know about me. That's not really true. But I think now I genuinely have a really strong respect for them and
So
what
do
they
you
think.
feel that the way they see you now is more of an autonomous and independent and like a creative way of looking at their daughter than they had before?
Yeah, certainly. And also
Uh-huh.
like I think there was a strong emphasis on like my identity being completely destroyed by society. Like I experienced chronic shame because India, like they really have strong rules. If you don't follow, you're going to be penalized. And I really wasn't the most poster kid growing up. Like I said, I was pretty bad. And
Mhm.
so for me, like now that doing all of this gives me a sense of respect, my family doesn't feel like I am bringing them shame. So maybe
Mhm.
that is involved a little bit in seeing me as this person that they can, honor and also like value, and also
Right.
allow to do whatever they want because they think my judgment isn't as bad as it used to be or something like that.
Got it. Okay. Well, yeah, so there was, that's good. I was jumping to Toronto, but we weren't ready to jump yet because there was more. I mean, is it, and is there still more that's kind of like essential for us to understand what prepared you to kind of make that leap?
No, I think we've probably covered it. It was
Okay.
sort of along the same lines, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of it was just this internal capacity to take that risk, which I think a lot of people are like, even if they have the imagination and they have the reality and its integration, the act of actually taking that action is where people like they
Mhm.
really limp out. And I think
Right.
taking that choice and like making that leap for me was really this act of faith,
Mhm.
which I am really grateful it turned into fruition. But if I didn't have that much confidence or even just like capability to push myself that far, it wouldn't have happened. So
Mhm.
I am happy that it turned out like this, but like it really could have gone royally bad. So
Sure. Well, I think so many of us don't figure out those kind of negotiations between, we could say, identity and reality, like who I really am, and then what this world really is. Because there's often that moment of like, wow, this world wasn't designed for me necessarily. It probably, but then there's a way we can maybe redesign ourselves to be more compatible with the world. So I'm guessing that when you went to Toronto, this was the first time you left India. Is that correct?
mhm.
Okay. So then I'm just imagining, like, I kind of want to know about the day you got on the airplane, and then you were on the airplane, and then when you stepped off the airplane, kind of into this world that you had imagined, but now you were like, what was that moment like, that moment of arrival?
My rosy picture just crushed in itself. I painted this thing. I'm gonna have freedom. I'm gonna have everything. It all had to be destroyed. But I think that was necessary as this.
Wow. Were you like depressed when you arrived, or was it?
No, so like I was quite excited, and my ex's mom brought me because like I refused any help from my parents. I was still in that rebelling state, right? And so I was like, I'm gonna go on my own. You're not gonna like get me there, because I thought if they came with me, they're gonna control everything again.
I
So
see.
I really
But there was someone there to receive you when you arrived.
Yeah, I told you my ex's mom helped me, but she was only there to drop me there and nobody else after that. So it was just me alone. Maybe that was a bad decision, or like in like a completely new country. But I really didn't trust anybody to actually help me there, and I wanted my independence. So
But like, even like the first week when you're figuring out, like setting up your home or like getting things to eat, like what was that like for you? Just the first kind of, you're just beginning to breathe the new air.
Like, I think the first few days I felt like pretty normal, like that things were gonna be fine. But then like I had like a really like extreme incident happen in the first week that really just shattered a lot of my like beliefs and projections of anything can be positive. And then I landed in the hospital. Like,
Oh, wow.
long story, yeah. And then that was the first time I landed in the hospital, but the second one again. But the thing is that like then like after that I knew that like going back to normal and going even to my classes would not be the same, even though I was like admitted back. But I refused to stay on campus because of just like I didn't feel like safe and like happy there. So I just stayed at the person that I met at the hospital in their place the entire time. And I went to classes still, but it was just like I actually started like that's when I started going crazy a little bit deeper and deeper and deeper from that incident. Even at the hospital, the thing when I woke up was like, find Waldo. And I was like, who the hell is Waldo? And we couldn't find Waldo.
Oh, yeah, the Where's Waldo game, right? Was this like some kind of test of your cognitive ability or something?
Yeah, that's how I felt. I thought things were speaking to me. So that happened right when I woke up in the hospital. I started.
So I mean, I don't know how much details you want to share, but I'm imagining, did you have an injury?
Yeah, I went crazy. But the psychosis wasn't identified until the end of the semester, which is when I was supposed to fly back to India. But then I had like a meeting with my accessibility person, like a regular check-in. And I was just telling her, I thought like she would think I'm normal, but I didn't see that as like crazy talk. And she was like, you don't sound normal and we're going to put you in the hospital. And my parents were like, why did you not come back home? They were all worried. And then they got to know that they put me back in. And so the entire first semester was just like,
well, so I'm getting in a sense of like, just really intense. I mean, first of all, just everything leading up to coming to Toronto, and then you get there, and like in the first week, you have this big thing happen. You're in the hospital. People are talking to you. You're coming back to consciousness, and they're saying, "Where's Waldo?" And yet you're in your second year, right? At this point, you're in your third year. You're studying both psychology and philosophy. And just to remind everyone where we started, this question of mindful imagination, you're now doing research. You recently appeared on the YouTube channel Seekers of Unity, and you were talking about the question of identity, and including spiritual identity. And you were also, at the end of the video, you were talking to people about how they could participate in your research. So there's a lot of drama, there's a lot of intensity, but you've
I found my way.
Figured out your way through, and you're doing your work.
And I think like those incidents were my inspiration to produce the work I am today. Like for me, like I think that entire period it was technically an ego death, and that's why my current like interest in the ego and identity
You
and
said
self.
an ego death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like I think I mentioned to you the last time we met, like just that I have a tattoo of like an owl here, and these were not symbols that I was following, they were following me. So I just did it spontaneously, and this is technically the symbol of death. Recently I've been seeing butterflies, which I can show you sometime, and so that is this like sense of rejuvenation. So it makes sense that now I'm actually like out of it completely. This is my
Well, and
happy
owls
period.
and butterflies both fly, so I'm just getting
Yeah, I
imagined
have
like
a lot
just
of bird symbolism everywhere. Like this, like
uh-huh.
my ring, it has like wings on it. I don't think you can see it properly.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like I just found it randomly. So there's like,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
I do have a thing for like, I always felt like I could fly as a kid, but I
Mhm.
can't. I am a human being.
Yeah, you gotta line up the imagination and the reality again.
Reality.
Yeah,
And I've
yeah.
always lived in the imagination. So like technically, even my psychosis was this like thing of my imagination tendency just going too far. I could not live in my reality because reality was too much. So I just completely broke away from it. And so that
Mhm.
was also a part of the talk that you, if you go too deep, you're gonna lose your grip. And I think that's what happened to me in the first like
Right.
semester of coming here. And it
Yeah,
was necessary, I would say though.
I get this whole sense of like, again, if we invoke John Vervaeke, he talks about optimal grip, right? It's like not too zoomed out, not too zoomed in, like not gripping too tightly, but not being so loose that we let go of what's important. And it just seems like this has been really intense for you, but in the same way, that's really been kind of the project, I imagine. And
Exactly.
not to, I'm sure there's plenty of more personal stories, but I also just want to introduce that you gave a TED talk on mindful imagination, and you've told me in previous conversations that like you have some friends and you've taught them a process of a mindful imagination. So if someone listening kind of like just takes in your story and they can see how the arc of that story is something like mindful imagination, maybe at this point someone's saying like, how could this help me? And I'm just curious what I get the sense that you're still developing this, but in
Yeah.
terms of like someone who just has something going on in their life, I imagine some sort of well, let's just say that person who's imagining something that doesn't fit reality, and it's maybe a part of the source of unhappiness or difficulty in their life. Um, what is it that you're developing for someone like that?
Yeah, I think for me, like, say the psychosis was sort of this incident where I was really unhappy with my circumstances. And so I escaped in my reality so far that I could not at all be grounded in any way, shape, or form. And so I think a lot of the time we do use our imagination to get us off of the unhappiness that we experience in our lives, but that radical acceptance of what is in front of us and like ability to like hold that grip and come back on ground is really important. And I think uh, we have to sort of learn how to live with the unsatisfaction before we can find something else that can satisfy us within our imagination and in our reality. Otherwise we will not, like, we will genuinely become complacent within our imagination, which was something I mentioned in the talk, where a lot of the time our dreams are really our tool for escape, and within that escape we're actually being inactive and completely passive because we're not really doing anything to solve our problems. So
Right. We're just going into that virtual space in our mind where we can make it all the way we
happen,
want it, which is beautiful, but it's not an end. It's
yeah,
like,
it's self-indulgent in a way, that process of just imagining
right.
doing whatever, but it doesn't end up producing any results. So you need like self-control even within your imagination to bring yourself back to reality and be like, let me focus on what is there.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly, I think the metaphor I used was blowing outside the balloon within the thing. It's like if you have a reality and what's in front of you and you're just dreaming and you're blowing outside the balloon, it's sort of useless. So you have to find a way to take your imagination and blow it into reality, find a
Mm-hmm.
way to fit it into everything that's around you.
Right. I'm just really
Exactly.
drawn to your hands right now because you mentioned part of your interest in talking to me had to do with motion. And
Yes.
yeah, I mean, and I think it's
Very moving.
really cool to see. Yeah, because like, I mean, even the balloon and what's outside the balloon, what's inside the balloon, like in the work that I do with clients and whatnot, people might have a difficulty they describe in terms of pain, but one of the things that we often investigate is like, how are you using your attention? And then sometimes before we know what's wrong, let's say with your shoulder or something like that, what we discover is like, wow, there's a strong tendency to put the attention in one place and never to put the attention in another place. And it's just like there's a whole picture here, and we're only seeing part of it because of how we tend to, like, just a simple example, we tend to look forward with our eyes. And so we're more aware of the space in front of us than the space behind us.
Mm-hmm.
Seems simple, but like we can, but then individuals, we can have particular biases, like, someone sees more out of one eye, and then suddenly that's the eye that they look at the world, and
remember you did something like that with me.
But this is the movement thing. I just wanted to draw attention to how you're using your hands, because that seems to me, it's like it's helping me understand the picture of how that translates into action in the world, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I've always used movement as a tool of expression, because like, since you do work on embodiment and movement, I think that's what drew me to you, because I think expressing yourself through physical movement and embodied movement, it is a tool of expression. And so dancing has been one of my really like prominent interests, because it completely it allows you to express yourself fully and let go. It's not like you're trying to control the motion. It's just like fully fluid. And in that moment, like whatever is inside comes outside. And I think that inside outside transaction is something I'm interested in, specifically if you're talking about mindful imagination as well. The dreams are inside, but we're to bring it outside. So we need to move and start acting and have any sense of motion involved in our life. Otherwise you're passive and it doesn't really come out. And so
I think a lot about this inside outside sort of exchange between our inner world. I'm thinking something, you have no idea what it is, but then when I speak, it's like I'm taking it on the outside. And then, but is the inside outside thing, I just want to come back to, because I had it asked you about like some friends of yours that you've talked to. Is this part of the language that you're using with your friends? You introduced.
I customize it to each person depending on how they understand, because I think that's been my teaching style always. Like I don't have anything specific that I go off of, but I have to learn your language and then I tailor my concept to you. But I think inside outside is one of them. It is quite simplistic to explain how there is a lot in the subjective world, but technically pushing it out to the objective world, which is, I think the objective world is what we would conceptualize as reality. And so usually our imagination exists within the subject. It's not really something that can really be experienced by you unless you share it empathically or intuitively. So
can you give an example of like a situation of a friend of yours that came up and how you talked to them about it and some of what that was like?
I think we were discussing something similar to like how like a lot of people have imagination that isn't really like, their dreams are not in line with their reality. They are really just deluding themselves. And how do you necessarily start grounding it into reality? And the example I gave was like sort of like romance. When you start having a crush and suddenly you're like, you start imagining all of these things with somebody. I'm going to get married. I'm going to whatever. But none of them are actually in line with reality. So bringing it back to...
It never happened to me.
Really? Really?
Story of my life, actually.
That is funny. Well, the point is that to bring it back to grounding, to bring it back to reality, is that you start seeing it in like smaller ways. Okay, I'm gonna go talk to my crush. Because if you just live in that realm where you're just like, oh, this is gonna happen, it's sort of stupid. So the way you bring it to reality, sort of like make it grounded, is to take it and break it down into simpler steps. Things that are actually feasible, which is that me and my crush will start talking, they'll have flirting going on, not thinking that we're gonna get married, right? And so that's how I would describe mindful imagination, is that you can have whatever dreams you want, but I think any dream can sort of fit into reality if you really like condense it down to a simplistic form enough. Like say I want to become famous. Okay, start posting on your social media. Small things. So you can take a really huge dream, but you can really bring it to smaller steps. And those may be a transition to a really big one. So like the big dream is never ending. You can dream whatever you want, but those are not where you want to live. So you want to really live here and now, this integrated cycle where the reality and the dream it works in a flux.
I'm hearing you say that like you're helping a person get more grounded in their dreams. Like the dream is an inspiring thing, but it's also very much like it's not grounded. You said it's never ending, which means like it could be, I don't know, like I could just get lost in that. Then if I think of the simple first step that would be towards that dream, but I also ground it in reality by going and talking to my crush or doing whatever it is that actually tests the validity of
Exactly.
my capacity to take these steps towards. And then maybe sometimes I imagine I'm crushed.
Yeah,
So make a
exactly.
bad joke, it doesn't work. But then I'm not continuing to pursue something that
Exactly.
is just going to further
So
disorient.
failure is not actually a problem, because then you can just pivot into a different direction. You can start dreaming in different ways. So for me, the trial and error, even in the balloon, the thing that I said is like you have to blow it slowly and you have to really test the limits of your reality. Otherwise, you can easily break away. And then you're just, because I have been in circumstances where like I was like, okay, I'm going to start a business. I've started so many things because that initial dream and the pull was there, but there wasn't this integrative cycle. So really the dream collapsed on itself. And that's something I wouldn't want for a lot of people. So
Right.
you're free to dream, but when you actually force it into reality, you have to be very mindful on how you're taking the steps. And there needs to be some amount of future planning that's involved. And so like the one good thing, like my professor really told me, I was talking to him about hope, and it was like, hope really needs planning, otherwise it isn't hope. And for me, that really went into my head, because a lot of the time with imagination, there is wishful thinking, but people don't have the faith that comes with hope. And so that kind of faith that is in hope, it can only happen when you truly believe there's a way out, there's some plan forward. Otherwise it's not necessarily hoping for something. And so I think that creation of a plan, or even if the plan isn't completely solid, there's just some element of I can see it happening, and there's some mindfulness of circumstances. I think that's about enough to actually get you started on whatever you're doing.
Right. And so how does this fit into the fields that you're studying? Psychology, philosophy?
Certainly. So I think for me, my interest, like recently, there is definitely this thing in imagination. And so my professor, he does psychology of imagination. That's where our interests were like, oh, we found the perfect match right now. And eventually I want to go into Freud, which is also like, he deals a lot in dreams and imagination as well. So I see a lot of the current things that we're talking about eventually still panning out. But there's also other interests that I have, which is in developmental psychology, religious stuff as well, which I've been talking about already. And there's this thing that I'm focused recently on, identity and the ego, which relates to my interest in Freud that I will sort of eventually go deeper into. But at the current moment, I really want to focus on like using aesthetic and artistic elements to focus on how they're, or anything imaginative as well. So that's where my focus is, because that's what I do a lot. And the project that I'm doing right now at school is the one of like, how do aesthetic or artistic experiences help people sort of understand or discover who they are, or even shape their identities in some way. And the second part of it is like, how have they helped them transcend themselves? So a lot of the time people are like, don't focus on your egos, don't focus on yourself, just think about the spiritual aspect. And I was like, there's some need to focus on your identity. Maybe that's the source of transcendence. And that's where the interest in my project emerged. So right now, that's what I'm doing. Like I have so many different interests, different places, just integrating them so that I can get into grad school. And once I get into grad school, I'll worry about a lot of other things eventually.
Yeah. So if people are enjoying listening to Rayan today, she also had a really fascinating conversation with Guy Sengstock, who's the head of the circling training, which I'm actually involved in circling along with Guy.
That's how I found you.
Yeah, that's so it's part of the connection. And part of what you and Guy talked about were different. Like harking back to our conversation about mindfulness, and it kind of felt restrictive to you at a certain point. And you were also referring in that conversation to different traditions of mindfulness, and like how, for example, a Buddhist meditation might be about a single point of focus on the breath or something like this, whereas you were you come from a Hindu tradition, and you were talking about the sort of like vast diversity of ways of being spiritual in that tradition, and then just now you were talking about spirituality and the individual, right? So that part of it is like, how do we find our place in this world? So anyway, there's a number of things, but we talked about this a little on our previous conversation. I just wanted to come back to this question of spirituality, because it also seems, I know what I wanted to say, because you were just speaking about aesthetic experiences that help people transcend. And just I'm going to just say a couple more things just to sort of fill in some of the background of our last conversation. But we talked also about how, okay, there's these different conceptions of spirituality or ideas of the divine, but we also live in a world where like there's just a vast number of people who are, if not atheist, they are just like disconnected from the idea of the divine. Maybe they see it counterposed to science. I don't see that in you. I see you, doing research studies, but talking about the divine. But what I remember you talked about with this question of beauty or aesthetics is like, wherever my starting point is spiritually, I can have an experience that is like, yeah, I just experience beauty. It could be music or dance, as you were talking about. And whether I'm consider myself to be religious or not, when I'm struck by beauty, there's like kind of this opening.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like some of what you're trying to
exactly
look at in your research. Am I right?
Yeah, because if you divorce these concepts from religious dialogue, you can see how faith is necessary. And I think faith and beauty comes a little bit together. It's integrated, because whenever you're awestruck, you feel like I have so much confidence in this thing. And so there's like a lot of ways I think religious themes, they like their words have a lot of meaning when you can see it without the heaviness of, like, I don't know, religious belief in the way they
and the tradition and the history and the politics. Exactly. It all just comes with it. I mean, you say the word God and like we're already like having an argument, like, just like what?
Yeah, but, I couldn't say the word God for a very long time because I felt icked out by it, the way society propagated it. But now I have my own relationship. It's just easier for me to say that. But
right.
I feel like there is some need for explaining whatever something profound would be, and that's what I'm trying to experience in this like research study, where even my graduate school interest is integrating science and religion and how like they aren't this dichotomy as usually believed. And I think using aesthetic experiences, it's very accessible to most of the public, and they've probably had something where they felt something spiritual that was related to something related to beauty, or just it could just be being in nature and they're like, wow, I'm really struck by this. It is so profoundly beautiful that it makes my existence worth living. And I think that's the experience of beauty. Say you're loving somebody, whatever else, it gives your life some meaning. And if we talk about meaninglessness, here's the solution.
So when you find a person, because I think you've been doing interviews, and someone says, well, I was walking in nature and I was struck by beauty, or I was with my beloved and I felt this opening, like, are you, I mean, I don't know all of what you're doing with the research, but how do you like, you're collecting experiences like this from many different people, and I imagine obviously they're all having different individual experiences, but are you looking for patterns? Are you
themes, like similar themes that sort of like really explain what might be common between all of these experiences? And I think say for example within the identity, sorry, my throat is a little bit so on the identity thing, for example, because there were two sections of the study, a lot of people described a lot of experiences, and one of the themes that I really found very intriguing was the sense of losing yourself in order to find yourself, even within an experience, say spiritual. But there is a sense of that you let go of your identity and complete immersion into experience, and then you feel like you've discovered something spiritual. Say you're listening to music, instead of the music being there and you being here, there's a separation. You unify to a degree that you've completely lost yourself in the experience, and you feel like, wow, this is truly me, And so those experiences were really described like a bunch of times, and there were others that like really struck to me. And so in attempt to understand what really is common, what I really am trying to see is like whether these experiences of beauty give people this kind of significance or this kind of structure to their lives that they wouldn't see otherwise. Because a lot of the time religion is the source. They're like, that's how they find meaning. They derive the sense of like, this is who I am, this is what I should be doing, this is what transcendence is. But I am reducing it to something that we can all relate to, which is aesthetics, which is this experience of beauty. And through that, I've seen that it is quite prominent. People do have this kind of richness to their lives. They just don't focus on it very well. And now that I've highlighted it for them, they can see how that's something they want to experience more, because they're like, wow, this is actually making my life more fulfilling and more rich. And so
it sounds like that moment of beauty in my life, if I pay attention, it has like a secret to tell me about my path or something like that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, but also I think like a lot of people feel like this destruction of beauty, but just like I think if you're completely dejected and feeling hopeless or sad, a lot of the time you're not feeling like anything in your life has any kind of beauty to it. You're seeing it from a really like, I don't know, not very idealistic lens, right? And so for me, the experience of beauty, there is a sense of seeing things from a rose-colored glasses. There's this romantic like flavor to it, and you feel completely like struck by it, like we explained. And so those experiences, even though are rare, they really make our life more fulfilling, because that's what you're living for. You're living for those more profound moments that really just
I want to say
exemplify.
though, like I've had some of the most beautiful moments in my life were incredibly sad too. Like there's a poignant sadness that can happen. Like you know,
but it's still romantic. Like sadness can also be romantic, but I think like completely, like I think the opposite of beauty for me would be not ugliness, but just like it really wouldn't have any flavor. It would feel empty and hollow and really a little bit just like soul sucking, which I think is not the experience we all want. We don't want to feel hopeless. We don't want to see. And I think melancholy, for example, it can be very beautiful. Just the sorrow that you drown yourself in.
Yeah. No, like let's say I listen to a piece of music and I tell you that it touched me, and it maybe even brought tears to my eyes. And there's a way that it was like, it's almost so beautiful that it was hard to listen to or something like that. And yet it's opening me up. It's transforming me. I'm in a sense shedding my old identity, because I can't be who I was while this music is playing. I just can no longer contain my previous sort of idea of myself, because it just reached right into me somehow and changed me. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's sort of this losing whatever you identify with in order to find something more spiritual, which is your soul. So whenever you're struck, and I think love is sort of the one thing that does make you unified in like a very extreme way. Like it really is. There is no, this is myself, this is another. Or even music, if you're totally like devoted to it, the separation completely goes in and you're unified. And that's what Seekers of Unity is talking about. And that's what transcendence is like you find this complete union with God or everything else. But most of the time we need this separate identity to be with. And
do you want to take a moment just to explain to people who don't know about Seekers of Unity? It's run by Xavi Slavin, who I'm sure you know much better than me. I've watched him in conversation with Guy Sengstock, with John Vervaeke and others. But I mean, I think it's a community also. Is that right?
Yes.
So I'd love to know more about that, because from what I understand and from the title, Seekers of Unity, what Xavi is doing is looking at many different spiritual paths, and then but seeking to find common themes and whatnot. And you did a video on his channel. So I'd love to just, if you could talk more about, you know, what he's doing, but what you're doing, and what that connection is between the two of you.
Certainly. Yeah, I think for me that was the intriguing point. It was this unity that I've always like been a fan of social cohesion, but at the same time I'm so individualistic, right? And that's why, like, ironically, the talk on Seekers of Unity that I have is on identity. And that's where I wanted to focus on how like unity and like having the separate ego self is not really like opposing, that there is some need to have this egoic identification, which may not be as bad as most people like portray it. Most people are like, you have to experience complete loss of an ego to be spiritual or transcendent. And so first I focus on like, why is our ego like important? And even in Hinduism, why do we have these like images of God, which are these egos and these idolatry forms that we have, that gives God this identification? And I think there's some necessity for that, which I think a lot of the dialogue on unity just completely lets go of. But then like I talk about how unity is important, like through love, for example, the separateness goes away. And so like there is this like post-egoic state, it's just sort of this pre-egoic state. I think we mentioned something a while back on like Guy Sengstock's like dependence and these levels that we were discussing, and how like most of the time people don't even develop their independence and they're just dependent. And like first you need to develop an independence, and then you can unify in a more positive way. And that's sort of similar to what like I was speaking of, but I could let you just explain it a little bit more if you want before I
go about the levels of dependence and independence that we talked about?
Yeah, that thing.
Okay, well, so Guy, and this was part of the circling training, we had a discussion one day about a sort of a developmental trajectory where, of course, we're all dependent in the beginning. We're essentially helpless when we're born without, our caretakers. And then we might eventually move towards something we call independence, where, and I'm speaking in broad strokes here and not giving all the details, but so independence might be that I'm capable of acting. I'm not dependent, in other words. But something that I might do along the way, I certainly did, and I'm hearing in your story, maybe you've experienced this, is the sense of counterdependence, where it's almost like I refuse to depend on my family or on this institution or whatever, and it's like a guy makes a joke often. He says maturity is when you go to medical school even though your parents want you to.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Because maybe I actually do want to be a doctor, but I'm not allowing myself because I would never do
not
what my
rebelling for the
family
sake
wants, right? And so then I can't remember if he talked about interdependence or intradependence, but there's a way that maybe it's a sort of a transcending of this dichotomy between me and others, where I can be myself, but I understand that what I can realize is through the relationships I have with others.
Exactly.
And so I'm not tied either to being different than you, and at the same time, I don't have to have you to do things for me, something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's sort of what I'm describing with this pre-egoic, post-egoic state, where pre-egoic state sort of is like a baby, right? You don't have an ego, you don't have an identity, you're just completely dependent, and you don't have this separate sense of individuality. And that kind of unification is sort of bad, where like the baby can't even tell that I am the separate person, not my mom. This is complete helplessness, which you don't want. And so usually when people talk about ego loss, that's sort of like how it seems, and that's not the idealistic form. So what happens is that like in the post-egoic state, it's sort of like first you develop your independence, first you develop this ego, and like then eventually you get to this point of like actually having this unified ego loss that isn't really as negative as the helplessness one, but it is actually really positive.
And when you look at different religious traditions and different sort of narratives about a path to whether it's ego death or nirvana or heaven or whatever it is, but in more worldly terms, to a better life for an individual person, you're seeing different almost concepts, almost like psychological concepts embedded in the different paths that are laid out by Hinduism or Buddhism, or I imagine Western traditions.
Yeah, that's why I focus on developmental psychology, because that's where I think I can integrate all of these different dichotomies and see what might really be the path towards our fulfillment. And so I think in Hinduism, there's this concept of neti neti, which is that you, like, in order to discover yourself, you first reject everything else. And so here, self-discovery isn't the discovery of your ego, but it's of your soul. And so even though Buddhism is like, there's no soul, so there's no self to discover. So that dichotomy is a little different. I like this concept because first you start rejecting everything that isn't you, which is like, this bed isn't me, this isn't me, this body isn't me either, this name isn't me either. And then slowly by doing that, you find this like pure consciousness or pure substance that is your soul. And once you discover that, then you come back to reality. And now like consciousness now merges back into reality. Whereas for a baby, the thing is that like, you're like, they don't really have this distinction of egoic self. Like they are completely their experiences merged into the conch. Wait, I'm a little bit confused. But essentially what I'm saying is that in a pre-egoic state, there's less of a distinction. You haven't really understood where yourself starts and where another starts. Like they can't even tell that this is not them. So they start doing this like this is not me at a young age. But the thing is, we have to just take it that far that we find our spirit and then come back into the world. So it's not that you destroy the ego, because otherwise you're not functional, because egoship is also like, it's in relationship to your actions, autonomy, making decisions for yourself, identifying with your name, this body and this self. So those things are very necessary for daily life. And so you have to come back to the ego realm, but because it's post-egoic, you don't really identify with it at that level. it doesn't have that same like reference. And so it's sort of like that interdependent state where you do have this separate independent self, but it's so fluid that you can go in and out and you can unify with other things. And it's now sort of at its fulfillment. And so it's not this ego death, but it's this ego transcendence that happens after. Like
it feels like you're also talking about how, I mean, you described a lot of specifics and different layers there, but just as I think about it in context of our whole conversation, I feel like you're talking about how a person, again, if we use the concept of mindful imagination, and how imagination can take me to another place from where I am, but there's also sometimes I discover limits to my imagination. And I think that I'm hearing you say that like my religious tradition could actually be a source of limiting my imagination in some way. And of course, you know, in the same way you've explained, I could maybe daydream and go so far outside of the tradition that I just get lost. But there's a way that different traditions, they afford, again, different ways of conceiving or, again, imagining, not in the sense of daydreaming, but like imagining in the sense of almost kind of planning or rehearsing my future inside my head here. I
was wondering if you're talking a little bit about like how Buddhism, for example, doesn't believe in a self. That it does end up like if you are strongly a Buddhist, you will have a different like notion of what you have to do with your life. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, well, and I'm thinking of your conversation with Guy. Like when you were in school, was the religion part of the school experience?
Yeah, I guess, but like it's not like very explicit, but it's quite prominent that everybody believes in God and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And there's basic things that you all have like in common.
But you've had the experience. I guess the thing that I remember, you know, directly, you spoke to feeling limited by other people's concepts of mindfulness, which they were telling you needed more of, and they were trying to get you to practice mindfulness in certain ways, whether it was in a religious framework or not. Because you've been talking about how having this multiplicity of images of God or gods actually affords you, in a certain sense, to explore different versions of who I am.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think there is definitely this religious thing that I do bring to the table. Like just growing up in India, that's why I talk about it so much, because it changes my subjectivity so much. It's the fact that I've been like hearing these concepts, seeing these concepts all around me, that they have shaped my way of thinking quite prominently. And like now that I'm like seeing, I'm doing Jewish philosophy in school, for example, I'm doing other religions, and I'm trying to get really deep into them. And I see how that really shifts my like lens of thinking. Was
that, I also did want to get back to Zevi. Is that how you made a connection? Because Zevi is his focus or his background is in Jewish mysticism, but he's clearly interested in all the different traditions. I'm just kind of curious about you meeting Zevi and what's your relationship to him like.
Yeah, like I was really into Spinoza for a bit, and so I got really deeply into Judaism. I was also reading like about Buber, Idao, just stuff in school that like was really intriguing. And so slowly I think I found his channel sort of by accident. I don't really recognize maybe some stuff with like John Vervaeke as well. And then
so Zevi Slavin and John Vervaeke and Guy Sengstock did a whole series of conversations on YouTube about Martin Buber, and I think they've often talked about Spinoza as well, because I'm just making that connection. I haven't
really watched them, but I
I've been watching so many YouTube videos by John Vervaeke. That's been part of my let's say my path, and a lot of people's path these days for good reason. Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. If people don't know about it, they should check it out. But I'm not wanting to talk about John Vervaeke right now. I'm wanting to learn more about you and what it was like to connect with Zevi.
Yeah, so I just like shared like the fact that I was doing this research at school and how it related to like my Hindu background, and that the fact that I wanted to integrate into the dialogue that he was already conducting of bringing all of these different cultures and religions together. And I wanted to like sort of push back against one of his old videos, which he was talking about ego death and how like sort of the Jewish like annihilating the ego is sort of, I don't remember the word for it, but that was the source of transcendence. And I wanted to push back and saying that, no, you need to develop the ego first, and that's how you reach transcendence. So I was like, are you open to something like this? And then we ended up agreeing on like posting this. And I did it on Diwali just at home. So there was nothing like formal that I prepared, just my thoughts being at home with a camera. And I just recorded it like quite spontaneously. It was within the same week that we pushed the video. And so that got me really interested, like in your work, even a guy, and like all the circle. I think Seekers of Unity was that like stepping point that really got me integrated. And now I want to do more videos because I'm like, this is really interesting for me.
Yeah, cool. I mean, when I talk with you, and last time we talked a little bit about what I do, the Feldenkrais method, and how I think about imagination, and I can use different vocabulary, but what you describe as mindful imagination, it fits very well with what I'm doing. It fits with what John Vervaeke would call the imaginal, with the L on the end. And so I often feel like these conversations are just, it's like giving us the opportunity to discover that, yes, we do have different vocabulary. But what's reassuring is, like, just to meet you, you're from the other side of the world, and yet I feel like you've come to some of the same conclusions that I have. And so that's always, it's always just reassuring, you know, because we, as you said, we have to take a leap of faith when we follow our imagination. And yet it's nice to then get some, if not confirmation, get some resonance, like, oh, this works for you too, or, oh, you're kind of saying the same thing as me with different words. Or
that happens to me every time I read a philosopher. I'm like, oh, I've thought of this, and like he's saying the same thing, and then it feels like something is really reassuring the beliefs I've always held, but there's somebody else spelling it out. So I know what you're saying. I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, I could have discovered this first, this person did that before me or something like that. But for me, it's different. It feels very reassuring anytime somebody else mentions the same thing in different words. It's like where, like, it feels like this mind hive that we share, this collective consciousness, and we're coming to the same conclusions, which is amazing.
Right. Well, so what for you is the divine?
That's a very, very good and complicated question. I think for me, there is some connection of like my intuition to the divine, where I think there is something so spiritually profound that it is not accessible in our everyday life. It is like the mundane or the material. It can integrate it to the transcendent, but the transcendent does exist somewhere else. And so the way I describe it, it's sort of like the whole that's greater than the parts, my own definition. And so, like, even in terms of the soul, that's how I see it. So, and none of these parts really define what the spirit is, but that sort of essence that's beyond that is sort of where I see my soul existing. And I think that soul is in that way connected to God. But I think my conception of divine, like in terms of what is transcendent or whatever the quality is just pure truth or whatever that would be. And how that like sense of like complete omniscience, omnibenevolence, whatever attributes that you want to put to it, I do attribute some like anthropomorphic qualities to God because it's just easier for me to relate. But like my friend recently, she's been telling me about the monad, which is some like a Gnostic term of like conceptualizing the God, like God, that I haven't gotten deep into, but I think it does like simplify a lot of my concepts of the divine quite well. But I would say they're like really mathematical, intuitive. There's nothing like a God out there, like a person. But sometimes I do see them as a person because it's easier for me to project our human attributes. Like I have a parent out there who cares for me lovingly. Right. And so I project like my dynamic with my parents and authorities to God, just as a way of establishing relatability. But it may not necessarily 100% be the truth. It's just my way of conceptualizing it that feels more personal, so to say.
Well, I'm really interested in this idea of anthropomorphizing or comparing God to, you know, a parent or something. I mean, some of the developmental kind of stuff that I've read kind of makes the point that when you're an infant or when you're a small child, like your parents are like gods, right? They make your entire world. They make food appear. I mean, they do all of these things that that I, as little me, it's like they create the world, and if they go away, my world falls apart. And so and then, you know, fast forward to adulthood, or if just to use a
You have
phrase,
to become God then.
but you know, as I grow up and I develop my own concept of the world, especially in today's world, you know, like myself, my joke always is that I was raised as a devout atheist, right? We never went to church. We never did anything like that. And I'm very much in a place in my life where I'm thinking, I don't think it's true that there's nothing out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have a name. And yet what you just said, it's like, if you don't have a name, at a certain point, that's very limiting, because I don't know what it is that I'm relating to. If like anyone that I have a relationship, like I have a relationship to you right now, and we're talking, we are having a dialogue. How can I have a relationship to something or someone that I can't have a dialogue with? And if it's just emptiness and nothingness, you know, I mean, you know, and I'm very interested in emptiness and nothingness as one idea.
That. Like,
but whatever it is, sorry, I just
no, sorry, I cut you off. Like,
no, it's fine.
We focus a lot on the name. Like, it's like,
right, the name.
Our entire thing is like the name of God is just greater than God himself. I just wanted to like put that in between.
No, I mean, it's perfect. And there's so many traditions that point out, like, you can't put a name, right? Like, as soon as you mention the name, it's idolatrous or something like this. Mm-hmm. And yet, when you were talking about the Hindu tradition, you actually use the word idolatrous to describe the many gods and the images, and how you found that helpful, because it's like, at least I have a conception. I guess the thing would be that, you know, the danger of idolatry is that if you give me a painting of a Hindu god, I start praying to the painting or something, and then the painting like becomes, whereas the painting ultimately is something material, and it may be.
Yeah, it's not the representation. Right. That's where like even the dialogue on Seekers of Unity, that's what I was emphasizing. The ego is sort of this embodied form of the essence, which is similar to like, my name is what represents me. It's not really my soul, but it's how you can identify me. Same with all of these like idolatry based things. And so I can see how certain religions are like, don't do with the ego. We're not going to think anything about the ego. And they think of more the spirit in itself. Like, that's what we're going to recognize. So we don't need any kind of humanistic attributes, like putting them in an embodied form, giving them a name and all of those things. And so I see that dichotomy a lot. And my personal preference is to love the ego a lot of the time, because I like my name being called. I like my recognition, even though it's like, I'm probably going to die and I'm going to be my soul. But the fact that I existed like this, it has something to say, right? And so I think taking the divine and putting it in any form, it's probably not the truth, but it is some way of conceptualizing it that does give us this capability to touch God. And that's the metaphor I use, that
right.
Like, the only way I can touch you as a human being is through your body, and the only way I can touch God is through these forms that I can give God, even the name or whatever. And that makes it more personal, which is, I think, quite significant in my opinion.
Well, what I really like about what you're saying is I'm hearing that there's this possibility of creativity in my relationship to the divine. And it could well be that any religion is somewhat limiting to me in defining my relationship to the divine. And at the same time, you know, as someone who I said grew up as an atheist, I find that I'm actually more interested in the religious stories that, you know, have been around since whenever, that for most of my life I just rejected immediately, you know, even as like interesting stories I wasn't wanting to hear. And now, I mean, again, I guess in terms of like, because I'm thinking now, like, okay, this creativity, it could maybe solve the problem of an individual. But then there's also these larger questions of like us being together in the world, and like the kind of feeling that I'm getting at this point, again, like the issues that are summed up in that series on Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, is we're in a place where science and religion have sort of been pitted against each other, which is incredibly limiting, because on the one hand, you know, it's very easy to give a scientific explanation why an apparently supernatural religious story couldn't be true. And yet, is that really
enough?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's almost like that's not, it just feels like two different languages rather than
Yeah.
one person making an argument that disproves the other person, and at the same time, to decide to be religious in such a way that I would just ignore what science has shown us would also be a massive mistake. But it feels like as a culture, or even, I don't know, on a planetary level, like we're kind of stuck in this vice grip now, somewhere in between these things. And what I'm hearing you do here is just in your creativity and your invitation for someone to maybe have an ego and have an ego death later on. But while you've got your ego, like what can you do with it and how can you move it around? And like, yeah, it just feels really liberating. And it also, I get this sense of like, oh, this gives me more tools to actually connect to someone, whose experience is very different than mine.
Yeah. And I think like a lot of the time, this like differences in experience, they're actually like more linguistic rather than actual experiences. Because I think, for example, like with my aesthetic study, I found that most people share those common themes. They just describe it very differently. They refuse to use more spiritual words because of just like accessibility reasons. But when I actually talked to them, the fact that they can describe it as profound made them feel like those experiences were more meaningful. Otherwise, it feels like you can't really spell it out. You can't really give it that meaning. And a lot of the time, religious terms, they're quite useful in giving that meaning, even if it may be delusional, right? And I think with science, like, I think the initial aspect of science coming here, there was a lot like focus on meaning. They were like, it was integrative. This happens, and how do they relate? So there was a chain of meaning that was there, but eventually science just became, it's just too factual. There's no like aspect of describing what really is the essential meaning of all of these things that we're talking about.
There's no soul in it.
No soul in it, quite seriously. And so I think it's not necessarily that science is the problem. It's mostly that it's lost its way back to integrate into this intuitive way of thinking rather than just, because I think science is a little bit sensory. It is like quite empirical. It focuses on what is observable and all of those things, which is important, but it has to go back to the imagination, to the intuitive, this more like kind of language that I like using a lot of the time. But just staying in the imagination, not really grounding it into science, is probably not great either. There is some necessity to bring it back into the mindful realm, bring it back into our day-to-day, so.
Well, the thing is, if I step into the arena of religion or spirituality, in other words, if I step outside of kind of playing by the rule book of science, it doesn't mean I have to start doing irrational and crazy things, but it means that I can now use tools that science isn't so good at tracking, like the imagination. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of scientific studies related to imagination, but I imagine there's a lot of self-reporting. Like, I'd like you to imagine such and such a thing.
Exactly.
And then I'm going to study, but like, I can never go into your imagination and observe it. Only you can. And
so science is limited, like because of its own technology. Like that's why I like psychoanalysis. It's like, it's so subjective. And I think a lot of the time, the problem with science is it doesn't go into the subjective world. It doesn't go into the unconscious. It doesn't touch those things that are so fundamental to our nature. And so how are you going to investigate human nature if you just limit yourself to those tools? You can't discover meaning, purpose, just basic things we've been thinking about forever like that.
So we've been talking for a while, but before we finish, there's just one more subject area that is dear to me, and I know it's a connection for you, and we haven't actually talked about it before.
Oh, surprise!
Yeah, surprise. Well, I'll give you the connection. When I said I was about atheist growing up, I do think I had religious experiences, but I didn't know that that's what they were, because what they were was me in my bedroom listening to music, turned up loud with the lights off, and just like the music was doing something. But earlier today, I was listening to you sing on what's the song? Annie Lennox does the song, but you were singing.
I put a spell on you. Oh my God.
Yeah. So tell me about music in your life, and tell me about your singing, and how does it connect to everything else we've been talking about?
Okay, and that's okay. That's nice to know that you listened to that. That was just like, I posted it quite randomly on YouTube, not very conscious that somebody might listen to it.
I did. That was beautiful.
I might get more like on like posting more like better content. This was sort of just like rough, and I was just trying to revive my old account. But I think music is just my entire life. I make music as well, like a lot of my songs that I used to
You write your
express-
own music.
yeah, right. And also just like the music as well,
Okay.
like I play the piano, I do other, so just using sound has been one of my, and dancing is also like a part of it. So the creative element of musicality, but also completely immersing myself physically in that motion is really like something that I've been doing to gain well-being. Like initially I feel like a lot of the things that made me feel like I was suffering was just this lack of creative expression, and now that I found this like source and complete immersion, I found my like well-being come back to me. So it is quite significant in my life. And I think last time we mentioned how like when I was here during that crazy period, I had certain songs come to me at certain times when they were really talking to me about what I really needed to
Oh,
hear.
right. You talked about a George Harrison song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also there was like, initially there was one Bach song, which was when during the time I told you the first time I landed in the hospital, that's when it was talking like, please give me hope. Do not let me despair, just stuff like that, which really like was exemplifying every single thing in my head at that point. And then eventually the George Harrison song came in, which is about the rising sun, which is sort of this transition from give me hope, whatever, this dejected place, towards yes, I've
Like a
held on here.
rebirth or
Yeah,
something.
but also like God just telling me, or like that's when I started conceptualizing God for the first time. I couldn't even say it before that, but just telling me that I've held on to you for this time. And like even though people have put you on the avenue of sinners, like you're still a part of me, and something like that. Like I don't remember the exact dialogue, but these experiences for me were like a fundamental part of my narrative during that period, and they came to me at exact times when those were things that had to speak to me. And so I think most of the time, say even with mindfulness, a lot of the time your attention will just attune to things like all of a sudden out of nowhere. And that's like there's often significance in why you notice the things that you do and why they speak to you. And so that inspired my current project, on why like some aesthetic experiences can have this meaningful tone,
Right,
can have the
right.
significance to them on what they really like exemplify about your identity, your life, and this connection to something more beyond you, you know?
Yeah, I'm really glad I asked you that, because that does help me to really see the connection. And we were talking about science versus religion, but also art is this realm that isn't bound by the rules of the scientific method. It's also not bound by the traditions of religion. It plays in another way, but it can almost, this is a funny way of saying it, but in almost a scientific way, music or other self-expression, it can do something. I mean, it's like, I want to say like the same way we can talk about a chemical reaction. It's like if I drop a song into your ear, it's like there's some sort of something unfolds in that way. I remember at one point in my life being in a serious depression and listening to a song that I'd heard many, many times. And there's this line in the song, I don't know if you're familiar with the band Sonic Youth, but Kim Gordon, the singer, she had this line about, I had a dream and it split the scene, but I got a hunch it's coming back to me. And then like she says that, and then the music kind of crescendos, and it's like, and I just had this sense when I heard it, like, oh, maybe I haven't lost my dreams forever, you know? And it's like, I'd heard the song before, I was going through something, but it was like, you could say it was random, but I put that song on that day because I liked that group, and there was something that soothed me about the music. And then that day when I heard those words, it just like
hit you.
It like right went into my heart or something. And yeah, so you've had those experiences, and in a sense, that's the experiences that you're really looking for.
Trying to get at, yeah.
When like even in the research you're doing.
Yeah, just because these are moments which aren't really planned, you can't really control them, but they have so much significance on how they made you reach somewhere else. And so the fact that there was this sense of unpredictability and the sense of surprise and the sense of awe that comes with it, which is something that I definitely want to get in. I mean, there are other incidents that people describe that were planned, where they were like, I'm just walking in nature, I did this specific thing. But there are also incidents where there was this sense of being struck by it all of a sudden, not really knowing where it came from. And so I'm trying to integrate all these experiences into a whole. And I think my relationship with art in itself inspires a lot of my work, because that's how I relate to the sublime or whatever it is. And I genuinely feel like it is the source of our connection to it. And Hinduism in itself it's very artistic, like the way we describe God. And I think it is nice that we have this idolatry stuff, because it gives that creative expression to that sublimity. But I can 100% say that it is never the truth. You can like, so I can understand the anti-idolatry stuff where it's like, don't put it in anything because you're going to make it into a crude form. It's not going to be that pure form. You're going to take it, you're going to make it whatever you have. And so either you can say that we're dirty and whatever we create is dirty, or you can say that it is our way of touching God. And maybe like we have to make God fall down from heaven to actually relate to God. So why not?
Right. Well, I can see how easily, if I believe that there is one God and you're talking about multiple gods, then I can just slap a label on that as idolatrous or, just wrong, incorrect. That's not how it works. And yet, if I can even entertain that idea, it takes me, like if I was back in my mindset as a Feldenkrais practitioner teaching a class, it takes me to a non-habitual place. It takes me to a place where I feel something that I could not feel if I cling tightly to my worldview. And it doesn't mean that I have to adopt this other worldview, but if I can step into it, I have more freedom of movement overall. I'm more flexible. And I guess the last question, because again, what I'm putting together at this point is like just some of the kind of key phrases from what we've been talking about is like when you hear that song, it comes in, it something unfolds, and maybe you can't be the person you were before that song played. And this might be like what you've been describing as an ego death. And it could also, in terms of conception, that imagination has a certain limitation, but we can understand it, that the horizon line of imagination is simply the horizon, and we could look for something beyond it. And I think that's what it sounds like you're doing, and why you're studying how, people's aesthetic experiences do that. I guess my last question is something you're interested in doing along the lines of creating situations where people are more likely to have such an experience that would open them up? Is that, like, I wonder, almost like that board game that you created, that's what I was getting like kind of generates that experience for someone.
Yes, I think certainly for me, the fact that like bringing it in a more natural like setting is very, very like a part of my interest. Like I genuinely feel that the only way emergent things can actually hit you is when you don't expect it. And so creating the right environment for those things to actually be experienced rather than just understood. Because I genuinely feel like you can have this cognitive knowledge of something, but like, for example, love, like you can know whatever the hell love is, like all of them, but until you experience it, until you have that drastic thing, you won't know the meaning of it. And I think that simulation is really important. I don't know if I like will be doing that because I don't have a lot of time for things right now, but I definitely want to like get into more experiential ways of like taking my research and putting it in the public's hand a lot more. Maybe I'll just start with the board game because I think it's a good place, something I've already brought into fruition, to like take it forward and see whether it actually works out. Because I genuinely think it's like, I wouldn't like when people are telling people like your bias, change your bias, and those like explicit ways of confrontation, they're always so useless. And like they make me feel bad if I even claim myself as a feminist and things like that. So I think it might be nice to just subtly influence the public discourse and the way people think and perceive. It may not be as relevant in the West as it probably is in India, but I still think that is something I'm genuinely very interested in doing, is taking it and putting it more into projects that are experiential. And maybe I'll do that more sometime.
Yeah, I love that idea. I mean, I joked about this last time with you, but I'll say it again since we're recording a podcast today. I mean, if someone listening wants to know about this board game, I mean, get in touch with Rayan, because like I'm sure that it would impact a lot of people beyond those who've been exposed to it so far. And for sure, I think it could make an impact here as well as it has in India, for sure, elsewhere.
I think this summer I do have time. So I do want to like at least get it started, like making it formal as a procedure.
Is there I mean, there's some videos about this that tell the story of you making the game and the science fair. Maybe we could put a link to that.
Yes.
under this video. Are there any other, just since we're probably going to wrap up, but just in general, for people who are listening, who are curious about what you're doing, who would like to be connected to you, where can they go? What should they do to learn more and to
Yes, so I have like a science news for students like link that describe my game when I represented at the science fair. So they describe like how it works and everything. I can definitely link that, but I would like soon, pretty soon this summer, have something where people can like get into the I don't even know what is the pre-run of it. Like I want to actually like experiment on a few people before I make you go forward. So just people that want to get like a free sample or like a free board game, something like that, which will be out at one point, and eventually I'll start selling it. So like,
oh, cool.
Yeah,
so
if anybody wants to get in touch with me right now, it would be great because I'm already planning to make it like a little bit more solid. So
you can give me information to put under the video, the best way to someone to contact you about that.
Yes, 100%.
Wonderful.
Yes.
What else would you like to say before we end? Just any last thoughts about our conversation, or what's coming up next for you? Anything at all?
Yeah, I think mostly it's just that I really, really enjoyed having this conversation. This is something that I've wanted to do for a while, just like express all of the things that I'm doing and put it out there for people to see. And so I genuinely am very grateful to get this opportunity. Maybe we'll have more conversations by ourselves, like just discussing a lot more.
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
But like so far, I think we did cover a lot of ground. So I don't want to go over the limit and just put too much information any more than what we've already said. But I certainly feel that like that did like it was a good summary of all the things that I've been engaged in, and it does help like communicate all of the reasons why I'm interested in these things in the first place. And so I'm really glad you wanted to touch on those like really like personal things to give the explanation of what is happening and what I've been doing. So yeah, that's about it. And thank you so much for having me again. I hope we get to do this again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's an absolute pleasure talking with you. And I definitely feel like I got to know you better and understand more of your thinking. I just think mindful imagination is a really wonderful concept, and more than a concept, I see it as a tool that you're using in the world, and I'm excited about it. So yeah, thanks so much for being here. I think we certainly will talk again, but we'll wrap this one up right here. So
bye for
so much. Bye, YouTube.
Bye, YouTube.